friends. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Michael here with another episode of the Street Smart Ventures podcast. I am super pumped, as always, for a very special guest, Quinn. Quinn, welcome, welcome, welcome. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
And I am super excited because for our listeners and audience, I've known Quinn for a few years now, and Quinn, they'll explain what they're about and all the amazing things they do. But I am so excited for our chat today with Quinn because we're going to talk really the A to Z on community building, connection, just really everything that is the foundation of relationships and how when you don't have community, when you don't have thriving relationships, really it's going to be an incredible conversation. I'm a little speechless in the beginning because I'm just super excited. But Quinn, I'd love for you to take just a moment to introduce yourselves to our listeners.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Quinn Jannetty, and I am a queer, trans, non-binary peer support specialist. I manage a project here in the state called CT Support Group, which is an online project that has been developed by young people and for young people here in Connecticut to provide connection, peer-led support, and community for their peers. Our platform really focuses on being an inclusive and trauma-informed space that prioritizes consent and choice and mutual respect for young people to come and share their experiences and build a supportive community with one another. So we have a Discord server on which I host drop-in hours for teens and young adults to get free peer support. We also have a website that has a variety of young people's stories that they've shared, creative expressions, blog posts, and a resource map. I also offer one-on-one peer support both virtually and in person through the project. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also a facilitator for some groups outside of my day job. And I also do some community education work. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, you're incredibly busy, Quinn. So what aren't you doing? I think that's the better thing to ask.
Oh, gosh.
And for our listeners, we'll be sure, as always, to have resource links when we post this. Quinn, I think I've told you in different meetings, like I literally have posters for your drop-ins at end of CT support group, formerly Turning Point CT. My story from very long ago is up on there as well. It's an amazing resource. So as Quinn mentioned, please, no matter your role, who you are, walk of life, it's an incredible resource. Please utilize it. It's a really heartfelt and meaningful project that is saving lives and just fostering connection throughout the state. And I argue nationally. I literally am telling everyone in my network nationally, too, about it as well.
Yeah, I'm lucky to, be working on the project and to have, come in at like a really pivotal time when the project was celebrating its 10-year anniversary. And we had the opportunity to sort of figure out, what has changed since the inception of the project and, what are young people looking for right now? And so we've, shifted some of our sort of more resource-based offerings to be a little bit more direct and a little bit more like, I'm out in the community and I'm online and I'm talking to people and offering them support and using my lived experience to connect with other people. So it's been really cool to sort of see that evolution over the past couple of years that I've been working with the project.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, it's, as you were talking, Quinn, it kind of got me thinking of, I'm kind of curious. Like, I know we have our preparation we did, but what do you think is the biggest change? Talking about, CT support group being, a digital hub for connection with your peer support, the Discord, one-on-one drop-ins. Just, hearing you mention again, like, oh my gosh, you're right. 10 years ago, from 2015 to 2025, what would you say is like the biggest 2 or 3 differences that you've kind of seen in way people are engaging in spaces, either online or in person?
I think one of the biggest differences that I'm definitely seeing is people are looking for more like direct connection with other people. I think during the inception of the project, it was really born out of a need for, young people specific resources, especially
Mm-hmm.
here in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And there really was a lack of that. And I think in the last 10 years or so, the internet has really, blown up and blossomed. And, there are resources, all over the place. And it's a little bit easier to find those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the myriad of resources that are available out there, people are looking more for like, who can I actually talk to? Who
Hmm.
can I actually go to and get support? Who can actually have a real conversation with me about what I'm experiencing? Some of that too, I think, may be informed by, the pandemic and the isolation that resulted from that too, is that, some folks are really feeling like their formative years, like their young adult life or their teen years were spent sort of being isolated from, their peers and from mentors and, adults in their life, whoever it may be. And so, seeing that desire for more direct connection is definitely one of the things that I've noticed, and that has sort of led to that the creation of the Discord server that we have, where people can drop in and get support. They can talk to other young people, play games together, um, share things that they're going through, and hopefully find other people who relate and can connect to
Hmm.
them.
Hmm. And that's incredible. And I think I'm kind of thinking about for those. I'm sure we'll get into this. We'll get into a ton of things. Believe me in our conversation, but I think you'll probably get this and shake your head too. I think there's a lot of professionals and the system at large that I think can agree with that, and I think hopefully would want the same thing, is to have anyone, right, who wants support to get connected. What do you think gets in the way of building that community and connection?
Oh gosh, yeah. I think there are a lot of things sort of at play, when it comes to barriers to creating and maintaining community. A lot of it has to do with systems and social conditioning and scripts that we are fed from the time that we're really really young. A lot of it is being in a culture where like exploitation and capitalism and colonialism are all at play and keeping us disconnected from each other and actually thrive on us being more individualistic and hyper independent. I think some of that is, folks having access to the internet where we are, constantly witnessing or experiencing, violence or harm or oppression, um, being exposed to that, just with the devices that we carry around with us day to day in our pockets,
Hmm.
and witnessing those things alone, which we are not really biologically hardwired to do. Some of the other things that I think, get in the way of building community is, the lack of modeling of like conflict resolution skills. I think that's a big thing that comes up for young people is, this pervasiveness of like cancel culture is, if I mess up or if I say something wrong or my peers don't agree with me, then they'll cancel me or they'll ostracize me or they'll make fun of me. um, and some of those conflict resolution skills or some of that is because of the pandemic, because of the disconnection from each other, and being out of practice working through conflict. But I also think that some of it is like conditioning from the internet as well. I think our lives are a lot more public than they ever have been. I think people are like recording and witnessing aspects of people's lives that we didn't used to,
Hmm.
like 5 or 10 years ago. And so there's this idea that, or there's this feeling that people are like, oh, I feel like people are watching me or they're judging me or I'm feeling like surveilled in a way by my peers. So I think some of it is that. I also think that cancel culture really like plays into, this idea that like people that you disagree with are like your opposition or the
Mm.
people that you disagree with are disposable as opposed to like opportunities to learn and grow and maybe take in other points of view. um, I think a lot of us are also insecure, and we all have our own reasons for being that way. I know like I definitely struggle with insecurity in a lot of aspects of my life. But I think when you compile that like insecurity with being risk averse or not
Mhm.
wanting to take risks, it keeps us divided and like disconnected from each other. Community doesn't fall out of the sky. And I think a lot of people are like surprised when I say that, but it's true. Like it requires like effort and
Mhm.
consistency. It
Mhm.
requires showing up and it requires offering what you have to offer and knowing yourself well enough to know what those things are. So I think those are some of the things that like get in the way of building community. I think, that conflict avoidance, that like being risk averse, the insecurity, the systems, like there are so many different
Mhm,
levels and layers.
mhm,
And I could
mhm.
talk about this forever.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, and I've had my own experiences with that. I think I definitely like looking back, even on my own personal life. There's definitely been learning moments where I'm like, ooh, shoot, Michael, like you could have done better, and that's the for next time, right? In terms of just handling conflict, because I didn't learn that the way I was raised. I was modeled different ways to do things, and but I've also seen on a systemic level, right? Is I have personally seen fear get in the way of connection and making progress, and just I think just the set. And every time I present or talk, I almost feel like I'm sometimes saying the same thing. I don't know if that ever happens to you, Quinn, where I'm like,
For
well,
sure.
I feel like half of what I talk about is just like letting people like feel like it's okay to not be perfect and mess up. Like if I ever write a book, it's going to be called Failing Forward, right? Because I'm so open now about like I am the furthest person from being perfect, but I think like honestly that just willingness to stumble, try things out is just such a key trait that has at least let me try. Like even if I had to
Yeah.
try like a million different things, I'm thinking a lot about what you said and just the cancel culture, right? It's almost like because I've heard from other young people like they feel like they don't have the grace to make mistakes,
Hmm.
but it's almost like there's this through this circle of pressure, right? If everyone feels like, oh my gosh, I can't make a mistake, or I'll be ostracized, or I'll be like shut out, or I'll be punished. So you're bringing up a lot of really, really interesting things right there.
Yeah.
So we've talked for a little bit about like really what doesn't work with community and community building. What would you say in your own experiences has really you've talked a little bit about that consistency and just showing up. Is there anything else on your heart and mind, Quinn, in terms of what really can work when we're trying to connect with each other?
Mm. There's I think one of the things that I think I come back to a lot when I think about like my community and the ways that I want to show up in my community, the things that I have to offer, is keeping in mind that there are systems that like benefit off of us staying disconnected from each other, and being isolated, and not wanting to perpetuate or like work in favor of those systems, knowing that like these are things that I don't believe in. Like I don't believe that we are meant to be this disconnected from each other. I don't believe that we are meant to take in so much scary, negative, bad information, on a
Hmm.
consistent basis. Um, I believe in the power of community and showing up for one another. I also believe in like pushing against this idea that we don't owe each other anything. This mindset, I think, has been really, really harmful, when it comes to especially young people, and feeling isolated or disconnected, or like they don't have folks who they can rely on. Because actually, we do owe each other. We owe each other a lot. We owe each other interdependence. We I don't think that anyone gets to the point that they are in their lives solely by themselves. We need people in our community who are like witnessing us and giving us feedback and holding us accountable. Um, so I think those are the things that are, important. I think one of the things that works if you're like kind of starting from the ground up, creating your community is joining groups. Like I call this my like Little Mermaid spiel, but it's so true. Literally, you know how Ariel is like, I want to go where the people are. Like that's
Hmm.
what you do to go to
Yeah.
your community. Like
Did
you
you
need
know
to.
that's my favorite Disney movie, by the way? I don't know if you knew
I
that.
didn't, but I'm so
Side
glad I
note.
referenced it. Um, she wants to be where the people are, and like that's what we need to do. We need to literally go wherever people are gathering and things are happening, and we can follow our own interests based on that. Like we can go to support groups, find a class or a sporting event, a faith meeting, an LGBTQ plus center, stuff happening at your library, mutual aid groups, like the independent bookstore down the street, like music making gatherings if you're interested in music, theater performances, pride festivals, book clubs, Stitch and Bitch, like food pantries, protests, game nights, Discord servers. Just like follow your interests and find your
Mhm.
people. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your roommates. So many people are like, "Oh, I feel isolated and disconnected, and I really want to like be building community." Like, y'all don't even talk to your roommates. Come on now, please, please, like make an effort. and talk to your elders too. I think that's a part of the conversation that gets missed a lot too, is like I've learned so much from people who have more life experience and wisdom than I have, people who have lived more life than I have. And that isn't even necessarily just an age thing too. People who have experiences that are different than mine. Um, it's really important to like seek those things out and learn from people. Um, with those things, like taking the time too to figure out yourself and what your strengths are and find places and communities to offer that, offer your time and your energy and your resources, whatever those may be. Know yourself well enough to know what you're good at and then find spaces to offer those things. Keep in mind what you're looking for in relationships. Are you looking for emotional support? Are you looking for practical support? Are you looking to connect with people or network in different ways? Are you looking for folks to go out with and just do things with and have a fun time? People to learn from, people to share with. Like, think about the things that are important to you, and then honor your risk tolerance. Know that you have a comfort zone and you have a growth zone, and then there's a more of like a danger zone, I guess. And
Mhm.
so finding a balance, between spending time in your comfort zone and spending time in your growth zone where things might not necessarily be comfortable, but they're not dangerous,
Mhm.
is a really important thing to consider when you're like, how do I grow my community?
Mhm.
Go where the people are, figure out what your strengths are, talk to your neighbors and your roommates and your elders, honor your risk tolerance.
Mm. I got a lot to follow up on this, Quinn. You're making me giggle when you're like, y'all don't even talk to your roommates. And like, I gotta tell you, um, as someone who naturally growing up was really shy, like I appreciate what you said about, you really have to stretch yourself and grow to make change. And I think that for me, there's a little bit of learned helplessness in terms of, for many different, which I don't have the time to talk about today, maybe private one-on-one with you, Quinn. But I think there is this, you're making me think a lot about like the pervasiveness of kind of the belief of, oh, I don't owe anyone. I think to me, like hearing that, as someone in my mid to late 30s now, like I think that's kind of a privileged position to be like, oh, I don't owe anyone, because you will need someone someday. Maybe not like right now, but it's almost, so, and I've not personally had someone like tell me that in that moment. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know how I'd be able to like honestly respond at times, because that is such a, but like you said, there's this, to have community, you have to be around people that have a different belief and aren't the same. And so I think that was really key that you talked about that, is I think you're going to come across people who are different on the inside, outside, every which way. And how do you find that common ground, or just an acceptance? Maybe you don't have common ground, and what can you agree on, or all those nuances. So I really appreciate you really breaking that down for our listeners and myself.
Yeah, of course. One of the other things too that I think people get in their heads about when it comes to building community is that, in order to like go where people are, or in order to grow their community or gather with their community, that it needs to be like a big event. It needs
Mm-hmm.
to have a lot of planning and a lot of forethought. And I really like to challenge people when it comes to that. Like, you don't have to plan a big birthday bash or like a
Mm-hmm.
big dinner party or a game night with like 15 people. Like, normalize everyday invitations. If you're going to be in your friend's town, for an errand that you have to run or something for work or whatever, text them and be like, hey, I'm going to be in this area. I would love to meet up and grab a coffee. There's a park nearby. Let's go chat. Um, or I would love to see you. I'm in your area. Do you need anything? Can I drop anything off for you? Things like that, like those everyday sort of invitations. And that's sort of how you start to grow, or step into that growth zone, is that like the more practice that you have normalizing those everyday invitations and
Mm-hmm.
interactions, and not putting yourself in a position where you feel a lot of pressure to host something big or be involved in something big that may be like overstimulating or overwhelming, but rather like small, more intimate gatherings. Like, those are really important, and I think those are where really generative conversations and connections are built too, is in those smaller settings, in those everyday
Mm-hmm.
sort of nonchalant interactions.
Can I tell you too? I love small parties. I actually had like a couple weeks ago with some friends and colleagues. It was just like three of us, like I well four of us, three others, and we just had like a little like coffee hour chat, and it honestly was one of the best hours of my life recently, just because we talked about things that were on our minds. I don't think many of us had shared with other people. Like there was that safe space, and there were some things like I had honestly a really tough May. I had a lot of work things that I honestly felt a lot of shame about. Like there's some things that were like, like keep me up at night. Like, oh, I feel like I did terrible. Like all like personal, professional blend, and just the power of not having that burden eat away at me and just letting someone and like talking it out has been incredible. Like that is honestly one of the most recent experiences for me of the power of connection and community is not carrying that alone and feeling like I didn't have anyone. Even though
Mm,
like logically I know I have people in my life, but just like actually physically, literally talking with people. And
hmm.
that is a lost art in our society today.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it is too. There's definitely this sort of like lost art of, just starting conversations with people, and I think a lot of it is fear. It's rooted in
Mhm,
fear. We're afraid of being rejected, or we're afraid of starting conversations with people that we don't know really well, because we're afraid we don't know what to talk about. And so finding ways to move through that fear and move through that shame too, that may come with, like, okay, well, maybe I do experience some rejection, and that's okay. Like, rejection is bound to happen, because if we're building a community, we can't do that unless we do experience some rejection, or experience some sort of setback or hardship. Like I said, community doesn't fall out of the sky, and it's
mhm,
so true. It doesn't just happen. It requires effort. A lot of times when I'm talking to young people too, one of the things that I say is like the cost or the price of like friendship and the price of community is inconvenience. And it's
mhm,
so true. People really don't want to be inconvenienced. They think like, oh, it's my friend's birthday, and people are going out, but like I really don't feel like going out, and like, oh, I'm gonna take care of me. Like I don't owe anyone anything. And like, okay, maybe you don't want to go out, but like that's your friend. Get
mhm,
out and celebrate their birthday. Like go and be with your people.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, no, and I think what when you said that, I'm a big note taker. Like I think you know that our listeners, you should know that by now. Like, and when you first said that, oh, I don't owe anyone anything. Like sharing what you've heard, I wrote down meet people halfway. And I
mhm,
think that is another lost art where that's in some ways. I'll be honest, my own opinion here and that is that can feel really sad to me to hear that someone would that's not really I hope not a judgment on that person, but that's just honestly feels really sad. And to be honest, like I think I've been there. Like maybe like for me, I came from an upbringing that I didn't really learn boundaries, and I felt like I was walked over. So like I can honestly understand in a lot of ways. Oh, is that just like a growth where okay, like you're moving past from feeling like you have to say yes to everyone or people pleasing, but like now is it did you swing so far off the other side of the pendulum that now you're like pushing people away or like not being vulnerable enough, which leads me naturally to my next kind of set of questions for you, Quinn. Is I think in a lot of ways we have talked so far about vulnerability, um, and hearing of clearly when I hear, oh, I don't owe anyone anything, that's not being vulnerable at all. So beyond that, I mean, what would you say people don't understand about being vulnerable?
I think one of the misconceptions about vulnerability, especially now, is that it requires of people that they share like way more than they're comfortable with, or they share so much of the ways that they're feeling with someone, and aren't taking into consideration what the context of their connection or relationship is with that person. And that can lead to people, not even taking the time to take a step back and understand, like, I'm feeling these feelings, and I want to share them. What are my reasons for sharing them, and what are my hopeful that the outcome is? If I am vulnerable and I do share, these things and what's coming up for me. I think exercising discernment is something that, like, people have, I've noticed more recently, started to struggle with a little bit more. I think, we try really hard to be like, well, I want to be vulnerable, and so I'm just gonna share, but not taking the time to recognize, like, first, what is my intention and what is the
Mhm.
hopeful impact or desired outcome is
Mhm.
something that's really important. Vulnerability isn't just like blurting things out for the sake of blurting things out. We want to be intentional with our vulnerability and with our sharing. So I think that's one of the things that gets really misconstrued or misunderstood.
Mhm. Mhm. I think when you were talking, like, I almost thought like red light, yellow light, green light. Like, are there, like, understanding there's going to be people or places that you should feel okay now, hey, this is a red, stop, don't go, don't share zone. And,
Mm,
learning, hey, there's going to be some yellow, maybe think about the impact. And then over time, you can really understand, hey, maybe certain people and places have shown you and built that trust with you, hey, it's a green zone, it's okay, and
mm.
it's a really safe space. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that, thinking of it, in terms of those levels is a really good way to start practicing some of that discernment. And also I think, having in mind, like, what does a safe person look like to you? What does it mean to you to be able to share things and to be vulnerable in ways that feel good and authentic and reciprocated? And like, who are the people that you want to share that vulnerability with? Um, Sometimes I think we put pressure on ourselves to be vulnerable even when, it's never going to be comfortable, but there are times when I think we push ourselves, outside of, our limits, in order to be vulnerable with someone, without really thinking about what our desired outcome is. And then, sometimes that ends up in conflict, or it ends up with you feeling really misunderstood by the other person. And so, like, thinking about those levels and exercising that discernment, I think, is a great way to start. um, Vulnerability also, there's a lot of tools for folks to be able to practice vulnerability, even starting, as sort of low level as like a feelings wheel, trying to figure out what are the things that are coming up for me, what am I feeling, and then taking the steps to sort of unpack, like, why may I be feeling this? Are there certain situations with this person that I'm, in relationship to, that bring up these feelings? What does that look like? And then even like tools like, you know, thinking about, being vulnerable with ourselves. When we find ourselves, acting in ways that, like, either we're not proud of or don't feel in alignment with what our self image is, finding ways to be vulnerable with ourselves and take a step back and be like, okay, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I'm thinking, or this is the way that I acted in this situation. What else is true about either this situation? What else is true about the other person? What else is true about me and, that my history and what I've
Mhm.
experienced? Like, what might this be rubbing up against? I think taking the time to, like, just ask, those questions and to be able to be vulnerable and honest with ourselves is
Mhm.
a good place to start.
Mhm. Um, no, you're so right, and I think what I'm thinking about now is, oh, like, this is definitely, like, maybe I'm not the only one, maybe I am, but I think, there's been times in my life where, like, oh, I've made a ton of assumptions. Oh, like, what's really going on for me? What do other people think of me, about me, this, that, whatever, right? And I think, like, in those moments I was not doing well, and just in those times, right? Then later on, coming to find out, oh, I made a lot of assumptions, and that person didn't really think that way. Didn't really
Mm,
actually do that, and like what I made up in my own belief system, my own stories, telling myself certain things. That was
mm.
a huge, huge learning curve for me. So I think, both the being honest and vulnerable with myself, but then, um, really the skill building of, realizing even if someone did think something negative about me, that doesn't define who I am, which kind of almost that now is leading me to want to talk to you about mistakes and how have mistakes shaped your life. Do you have anything you want to, or okay sharing about that?
How long do you have? um, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I'm 30 and I have learned, a lot about myself, especially, in the last like 5, 6, 7-ish years as I've been on, more of a gender journey and have been, discovering parts of myself that I didn't know existed and also being part of communities that, you know, I didn't know about or wasn't, formerly connected to. So, I've learned a lot about myself. I think in the context of community and mistakes, one of the things that I found myself running into a lot was um, conflating, being generous with having no boundaries. And I think some of that has to do
Mm,
with the family dynamic that I grew up in. So I have a sibling who took a lot of my parents' time and effort and attention and affection and protection. Um, and that sort of left me to my own devices in, different periods of my life. And so, I internalized this idea that I had to be small and needless, but also resourceful and helpful, not just to my parents and to my sibling, but also to my friends or to people I was dating. But what I didn't realize is that, generosity always has limits. There's always the context of my own capacity and what I actually realistically have uh, to offer and to give in relationships. And I wasn't honoring my capacity. I was actually really, really out of touch with it for a long time, and taking the time to sort of recognize what my capacity is and using that to make decisions about how I show up for the people in my life, the people that I care about and the communities that I'm a part of was like a really important shift or change. And that's something that I'm still working on. I think there's always room for growth and refinement, but I think a lot of the mistakes that I made were being in relationship to other people where I co-created this expectation that I was always going to be available, that I was always going to be able to show up and to offer resources and to, change someone's tire or, whatever, or cook a meal or help someone cover a bill, like whatever it was, whatever, the other person like needed. We co-created this expectation that like, oh, I can just call Quinn and like Quinn will show up and Quinn will be there. And it led to me being in relationships where I was like building resentment, but I didn't understand why. I was like, well, I don't understand. Like what, I'm being generous and like, these are people I care about. So I want to offer these things, but I also was offering them in relationships to people who like were not interested in reciprocity and mutuality.
mhm, mhm,
And it took me a long time to understand what that realistically actually looks like. It was really uncomfortable asking people to show up for me. It was uncomfortable asking people for help. I think I had this idea where like I always had to have things figured out. And that led me to a lot of situations where like when I didn't have things figured out, things in my life would just start sort of imploding
mhm,
because I wouldn't tell people what was happening. I wouldn't tell people what I needed, and I was really far removed from like what my needs actually were, and I didn't have the tools or skills to ask people to help me meet those needs. And once I started to shift away from being in those relationships where mutuality wasn't at the central core of those relationships, but also teaching myself and practicing checking in with my capacity, understanding what my needs were, and understanding how to ask for folks to help me get those needs met was like it was really life changing for me in a lot of ways.
mm. The magic word mutuality, Quinn. And when you were sharing things, I was nodding because you saw me nodding. I'm like, yep, because I've been there myself, and I think I had a ton of my own experiences where you're right. Yeah, I can just totally relate where I was giving to others a lot. I wasn't giving back, and it's not even. And I had to learn it's never going to be equal, like 50-50. I think for me, that's never been my experience. But I will say. It it's a big difference now. Again, the other magic word, discernment, discernment and mutuality, right? Is I know there are people that even if it may not always be or feel 50-50 or equal, over time it'll even out. Like, I if I have a friend who needs more support right now, I know that based on past experience and just, you know, with them being people of integrity and honesty, I know that there is this, yeah, mutuality. And I think I keep going back to, when you shared, you've heard a lot of people may have a belief that I don't owe anyone anything. And I think, meeting people halfway is, you know, just the spectrum, right? Of I don't owe anyone anything, or I'm going to give up my needs completely. And what's a healthy middle ground?
Mhm. Finding that middle ground can be really difficult, and I also think a lot of people have this idea that, um, that, like, even or equal are the same as, like, mutual or reciprocal, and those things are, like, very different from each other. I think mutuality sort of allows each of us to show up with our own capacities and tools and skills and knowledge and, ability to offer support, in ways that feel authentic to us. Like, I have friends who are really incredible at, crafts, let's say, and I am not a
Mhm,
crafter. But if I need something like mended or fixed or, need help sort of visualizing like how, something in my
mhm,
space might work, like I can go to those friends because they have those tools and skills.
mhm,
I have friends who drive cars who don't know how to change a tire or like, don't have, knowledge of like how often they're supposed to get an oil change or whatever. But like, that's a tool and a skill that I have. If you need your tire changed,
mhm,
like, call me, I'll be there. I'll help you do that. So, being able to offer the things that we're good at and not expecting each other to, not taking each other's inventory, not keeping track of,
mhm, mhm,
well, I did you a favor last week, so
mhm,
you owe me
mhm,
this week, because those transactional relationships are often going to lead to that place of resentment because you're keeping score, and keeping score in relationships is not a way to like build something that is like generative and healthy. Being able to show up and offer the things that we're good at in ways that feel good and authentic to us is the way that we grow together and support each other and move forward.
mhm. You're talking a lot about generosity. We've talked about that throughout our almost, actually, we're almost at 40 minutes here. Time's flying, Quinn. But I think what I kind of want to ask, I was going to ask you, what does generosity look like to you? But before I really ask you that, I almost want to ask you, is there has there been an impactful moment of someone being generous to you that like changed your life or just really like impacted how you saw and believe generosity to be?
Hmm, that's a really great question. Um, I think I've been really fortunate to have a lot of folks in my life, offer me generosity in ways that I didn't know were possible, in ways that I didn't expect. Um, I think one of the things that I'll say is maybe it's not an individual person, but I do feel like there's a community of people, which is the peer community, who has offered me a lot of generosity.
Mhm,
Folks who have offered me, time and space to talk about the things that I'm going through and to offer me support. Folks who have taken the opportunity to sort of guide me through a situation as I was very new to becoming a recovery support specialist and figuring out, what is my style of peer support? How do I want to offer it? What feels good, what doesn't? Um, there's been a lot of folks in the peer community who have offered me opportunity, and I think that's for me, one of the most generous things that folks have really done for me is,
mhm,
inviting me to have a seat at the table, whether that is, at the legislative office building in Hartford, talking with legislators about peer support and the importance of it, whether it's, offering me the opportunity to come and teach a course, or facilitate a group or be on a panel and have a conversation. Folks who invite me to, all kinds of things to come and table at an event that they're hosting. I think, our community is so incredibly generous in so many ways. But I think, we really do embody that nothing about us without us
mhm,
mentality.
mhm,
But we really do mean all of us when we have those conversations. And that's not to say that, the peer community is like one big happy family. Like, of course, there is conflict and discord within our community. There are folks who have different approaches, different ideas. But I think as a whole, I have felt really embraced by the community, and it's something that has been really near and dear to me over the past few years as I've sort of, navigated different situations and have moved into my role of sort of managing the project and have, wanted to hone in my community educator skills and finding spaces and places to offer those things. So I think that's, in most recent history, that's, one of the places where I think I've experienced the most generosity.
Mm. That's incredible. It's refreshing to be reminded that it really is just holding the door open for someone behind you, so to speak, just giving someone a chance. Like, how many lives have been changed by giving someone a chance? And obviously, multiple chances, but just an opportunity to show who they are, or what they can do, or just, how they can make an impact. So I appreciate you sharing that, Queen.
Yeah.
Um, Gosh, wow. So many good things we talked about. I'm kind of, me, I'm a little all over the place when it comes to like having these conversations. I kind of want to ask you more about generosity, though. So you've talked really so much about integrating opportunity, just being the most impactful thing for generosity meaning to you. What do you see as within Connecticut, nationally? What do you think? How can we integrate more generosity into our own society and our own professional, personal spaces?
Hmm. That's a that's a great question. I think that there's a lot of things that sort of factor into the kinds of generosity that we are able to offer, whether that's the tools and skills that we have, whether that's the connections that we have, whether that is the it could also be, power and access
Mhm.
to resources, whether those are financial or other, um, will sort of dictate the kinds of generosity that we are able to offer to our community and to show up with. So that's one of the things that, like, I think we need to continue to think about and keep in mind is that, generosity is not, um, it is not unaffected or is not untouched by all of these other things,
Mhm.
that exist, in our world. But I also think that in order to integrate more like true generosity, we have to think about, what I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. I think we need to stop conflating generosity with people pleasing. And I think that's one of the things that people get tripped up on a lot. People think that generosity is just like without limits, like offering, all of these things to all of these different people and not taking the time to, check themselves on like, what are my intentions? What are the hopeful impacts? Because I think in a lot of situations, folks, especially folks who have experienced trauma, sort of revert to some of these people pleasing tendencies. And it's really natural and normal to have those tendencies, especially when you have experiences that have shown you that if you are not, helping other people or making other people's lives easier, then you're not a good person. And that took a long time for me to challenge within myself personally. But I think that that is probably something that resonates with a lot of
Mhm.
folks is that, um, people have these people pleasing tendencies. And I think, in a lot of situations, people have learned that those things keep them safe, which can be true in a lot of different arenas, whether that is like within a family dynamic, within friendships, within romantic relationships, within, work relationships, like professional life. There are a lot of ways that people adopt people pleasing in order to keep themselves safe. And I think when we're moving away from those tendencies and moving into like true generosity and sharing the things that we have with other people, in ways that feel authentic and good to us and without, price tags or expectations attached to those things, then I think that is the way that we move forward. It sort of it sort of ties back to like this idea, of mutual aid, which is, where folks are mutually like helping each other and like allowing, giving freely to each other and supporting each other within a community versus charity, which is, in situations where people who have access to money and power get to decide who is and is not worthy of receiving
Mm,
resources or things that they need in order to like live full and connected and healthier lives. And I think that is true of generosity as well. I think that, what we get to decide the arenas and the spaces that we offer that generosity in, and the folks that we offer that to. And at the same time, we should be mindful about like those spaces, and be mindful about, power dynamics that may come into play when it comes
mm.
to like offering those things.
Yeah, no, you're getting me thinking because on the other side of the coin, we talk a lot about, I say mostly what we can strive for and move towards. And just it's a lot, a lot of our chat really has been on being aware of our own unique talents, gifts, strengths. How can we use those gift strengths to help others, help the world? But at the same time, knowing our limits and joining and growing and safe spaces. But I kind of want to ask you, I want to be sure I got to this is okay. So like the other side of the coin though, Quinn, what is your advice on like maybe things someone should understand or realize, oh, maybe a space isn't healthy or safe for me, or how do I handle conflict that comes up within certain communities or any community they're in?
Mm. Conflict is like one, absolutely unavoidable. I think not only unavoidable but also necessary, in order to like maintain and be in community with other people. Um, I think keeping in mind that like people are human and they are fallible and they have flaws, and that no one is perfect, no one is going to show up perfectly, and giving each other grace, which, to be clear, does not mean letting people like play in your face. It doesn't mean letting people like get away with things. It doesn't mean being permissive of someone treating you badly, but giving people grace, as an opportunity to, one, understand the ways that they've, contributed to a conflict or to hurt feelings or harm, whatever that may look like. Um, Having a conversation about it, and being able to find ways to move through that conflict is something that's really important, and something that like a lot of folks I feel like are really unsure of. There are a lot of great tools, when it comes to like navigating conflict, or figuring out, if there are um, things going on in spaces and communities that we're a part of that like would jeopardize our safety. And when I say jeopardize our safety, it truly means that, like, it is not, being in a community where you don't agree with everyone, that doesn't mean that it's not safe. Or being in a community with people, um, who can get loud and animated, like that doesn't necessarily mean the space is not safe.
Mm-hmm.
But I think finding ways to manage like some like dysregulation that like may happen, and know that like disconnection doesn't have to be the first step following a conflict or dysregulation,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's like in a group or in a like one-to-one relationship. But that there are other ways that we can move through and manage that. Sometimes that is, taking space. That doesn't mean disconnection though.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that means co-regulating with someone. Sometimes that means developing a plan with someone in order to move through the conflict. Like, there are a lot of different tools and skills that we can use to move through that, and to determine whether or not spaces are actually a safe place for us to be in, and whether there is room for us in spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think I really want to ask you, Quinn. Um, you've talked a lot about conflict and how to knowing that conflict's healthy. What would you say too? Because I think you and I have had many chats that were obviously not recorded, so we'll talk about it now again. But on really maintaining community and connection, because I think you and I have both maybe shared moments or experiences where like how do you as a community leader, a facilitator, how do you um, what is your advice on anyone who may feel discouraged at times or like not sure, hey, am I on the right track? Because I've certainly had a lot of spaces I was leading or a part of where um, again, it's human nature, right? If I maybe I'm also like a type A in a little bit, where I want things to be like the best they can be, and whatever I am doing, I want to excel at. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Just how do we just bring back that um, self love, self compassion for what we're doing, and how do we keep on moving forward when times may feel tough?
Hmm. I think like living in the world that we live in, it's really, really difficult to maintain connections, but I think it's also really difficult to like offer ourselves compassion when we are so inundated with like the world being like scary and being, potentially unsafe. And for maybe, not knowing or learning like how to move through conflict. Like, there are so many things I think that can really get in our heads, before we offer ourselves compassion. One of the quotes that I've heard a lot sort of around this that I like is, when someone asks you to name all of the people you love, how long before you get to yourself? And for some people, that's like a really revolutionary thought. They're like, oh my gosh, yeah, like how long, like would I even consider saying myself? Um, One of the things that I think is really helpful is to, you know, surround yourself with people who are like willing and able and want to remind you of who you are to them, of what you have to offer, of how valued and appreciated you are, and also offer that to the people in your life too. Some of my like richest relationships are with folks who are really consistent in offering appreciation and gratitude for the, not just me or not just for the work that I do, but I think, for a community as a whole or for opportunities that they've had. Um, Centering, I think, in that space of, I'm really grateful, even when times are really hard, even when things are really tough. And, I'm not sure what the next minute, hour, day, week will look like. There are things and people in my life that I do have to be grateful for, is really important. I also think that like, moving away from, this punishment mindset, where we, treat each other and ourselves as disposable. If we mess up, if we make a mistake, if we act in a way that we are not proud of, where we either punish ourselves, and that can look like a lot of different things too. It could, turn into really negative self-talk. It could be, using coping mechanisms that are not necessarily like healthy in ways that we would define that for ourselves. It could look like getting really defensive and jeopardizing connections with people even further, after we have made a mistake or caused harm. And, moving away from that punishment and moving into accountability, which looks very different, is important. And I think like a lot of the differences can really be boiled down to, support and consequences.
Hmm.
Accountability is like high support and also high consequences, right? Whereas punishment is, low support and also high consequences. Um, so moving
Hmm.
away from that like punitive mentality and moving towards, accountability. And like we can't hold other people accountable, right? Like we can ask people for accountability. We can ask someone to reflect on the ways that they have treated us or reflect on a conversation that we've had that like maybe didn't sit well. Reflect on the feelings that their behavior has brought up for us. And then we can ask people like, hey, would you be willing to navigate this differently going forward? Or if this comes up, could we do it this way instead? Um, Being able to ask people for that is really important, but accountability has to come from yourself. Like it's important to think about like, what are the ways that I can hold myself accountable? And I think like and especially like as a teen and a younger adult, um, I struggled a lot with accountability because I think for me, I equated accountability with like, well, I'm a bad person, like I'm flawed,
Hmm.
um, and I am like inherently, not a good person, like because I have messed up, I've caused harm, I've acted in ways that are not congruent with like my self image. And what does that say about me? And instead of using that as an opportunity to reflect and be like, okay, how do I want to navigate this differently going forward? What is the context? Like, because nothing happens in a vacuum. So what was the context of this
Mhm.
situation? What led me to, behave in this way or to make this decision or, whatever it may be? And then how do I want to move? How do I want to do this differently in the future? It's been a really important tool for me. But I used to sound a bit defensive or disconnect from people
Mhm.
and walk away. And
Mhm.
that's not to say that like I don't still sometimes wrestle with those tendencies because I absolutely do. I think a lot of us are conditioned, especially folks who are assigned female at birth. We're conditioned to be conflict averse. We're conditioned to be averse to experiencing anger or to experiencing I don't know, to acting in ways that like maybe like louder or more expressive or centering that like frustration as opposed to internalizing it. And so I
Mhm.
think like when I learned sort of how to balance those things was sort of when I moved from that defensive sort of protective stance into a more open like embracing stance. Like I want the people in my community to give me feedback. Like I want you to tell
Mhm.
me how I'm impacting you because otherwise, like one, I can't know that, and two, if it's negative, I can't change that behavior if I don't know about it.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm still kind of in awe of when you shared accountability versus punishment. Accountability, what high support, high consequence. Punishment, low support, high consequence. Did I get that right? Okay. Because I'll be honest, I've struggled with accountability, like, and I'm not perfect. I still like, I drop the ball, let people down sometimes. But I think you and I have had some one-on-one chats of what's at stake when there isn't accountability. And I've actually also was just on a call with a friend a week ago of they were going through something like in their position at work, and it really boiled down to accountability. And I think both the system, like who they're reporting to, maybe not implementing accountability, and how can you embed compassion and maybe like from what I heard from this friend of, oh, sounds like the bosses and the systems really set up to be conflict avoidant and like sweep under the rug to not make a fuss. But now it's leaving my friend and colleague, oh, like with a ton of unmet needs, resentment, and things that are, it's not equitable or fair at all to my friend who's doing a lot more than they should be. So you're giving me a lot to think about in terms of um, because I think now I'm thinking both like, yeah, like we need all of us, right? To it's not necessarily punishing ourselves, but we do have to be aware of everything we do and say does affect others. We don't live in that bubble. So yeah, it's that's really a lot to think about, Quinn.
Yeah, thank you for, giving me the opportunity to talk about that too, because I think, in the age of this, being worried about cancel culture and, we're conditioned to have this carceral mindset set. Like we want to, when someone does something wrong, like we're conditioned to be like jail immediately. And like,
Yeah.
I just want to invite people to maybe think about like, okay, like what else is possible? What else is possible in this situation? What are other ways that we can move through this and get to a point where like each of us feels like we're getting our needs met and
Mhm.
things that can resolve. That doesn't mean that you have to, like I said, like it doesn't mean that you have to give people permission to treat you badly. You don't have to give people permission to, continually let you down or not show up to relationships. But what it does mean is like offering grace in ways that feel authentic to you.
Mhm. Um, I could keep chatting with you for hours, Quinn, but I kind of want to. I know we're at the hour mark now, so I just kind of want to ask you. You know, I think to drive this home to our listeners, what's at stake without community, without accountability, without generosity, vulnerability, empathy, everything we talked about. What is at stake for us right now, both in Connecticut and nationally, worldwide?
Hmm. Uh, Perpetuation of isolation and loneliness, treating other people and ourselves as though we are disposable, when we make a mistake or act in a way that we are not proud of. This perpetuation of a lack of accountability and a movement towards punishing, and wanting to, inflict punishment or harm on another person. Um, Treating each other like emotional vending machines. True, like where we just expect that we can go to someone and dump our feelings and our emotions onto them, and that these things are transactional, as opposed to community building and ways to grow our root system and our connections to other people, and not knowing our own worth. I think, like, without community, I think, like, it's really difficult to know your worth, and to know that if you are good enough for people to take from, you are also good enough for people to give to pour into, and finding ways to do that, and that are sustainable and within your capacity is so important. But I think without community, that loneliness epidemic that people keep talking about is only going to get worse. And so I think, what I hope to see a world where we are so much more focused on community, where we are so community minded, where we are so much less individualistic and capitalistic and um, consumptive, taking
Yeah.
away from, and extractive and exploitative. Like, we actually don't have to participate in those things. Like, we don't have to treat each other as though we're disposable. We don't have to take and take and take from each other until we can't anymore. We don't have to give and give and give to other people until we can't anymore. Like, there are sustainable ways to do this. And so I really, really do envision, like, a world where we feel more hopeful and feel more connected to each other. Um, and I think, like, that's the thing that I hold on to. It's the thing I hold on to in my work. It's the thing that I hold on to in my relationships. It's the thing that I hold on to in my worldview. It really is my worldview that, all we have is each other, truly. And I wholeheartedly believe that that's all we need.
Mm, yeah. No, that's incredible, Quinn. And I think as you were talking, I'm like, yes, let's get back to tribes. Like, join a tribe or form a tribe, as we cannot do life alone. We need other people. This hour has flown by faster than I could ever believe. I've done a ton of these recordings, Quinn, and I'm not surprised our hour flew by. Is there anything else on your heart and mind as we're kind of closing out on top of the hour that you want to share with our listeners, or do you feel complete for our time together?
I think I want to leave folks with, remember that we actually do owe each other everything. We owe each other interdependence. And I also want to remind people of, something I said earlier in the episode. I was talking about, like, not not every gathering needs to be like big and planned out and like a big production. If you're looking to grow your community, lean into small bits for connection and normalize those everyday invitations. So text your friends, send them a TikTok that you find funny. Um, join a group if you're comfortable with it. Just find spaces to offer the things that you have, because I think all of us have a lot more to offer than we give ourselves credit for, and finding spaces to offer those things is what will get us free, truly.
Um, Quinn, I'm honored and humbled to spend this little over an hour with you. I know I learned so much. I know our listeners have learned so much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on and speaking with me and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your experiences. A huge thank you from me to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to have spent the last hour and a little bit with you. And every time we talk, I feel like I learned more. And you're just a great time, an
I
incredible
feel the
host.
same way, Quinn. So listen, you all have heard it here first. Again, big thank you to Quinn from CT Support Group. Please, please check out Quinn, CT Support Group. You know us at Street Smart Ventures. We're all connecting everyone everywhere. So we will make sure you have Quinn's info, the links, to CT Support Group. And on that note, until next time, friends, thanks so much.